In Genoa City, peace is never permanent.
Every calm moment feels temporary, like something big is always waiting just around the corner. And in the week of May 18th to May 22nd, 2026, that feeling becomes stronger than ever. This is a week where emotions collide, secrets begin to surface, and relationships are tested in ways no one truly expects.
At the center of everything, the Newman family once again finds themselves pulled into chaos.
But this time, the danger doesn't just come from outside enemies, it comes from within. Victor Newman is once again stepping into control mode. Nikki Newman, on the other hand, is trying to hold things together emotionally. And their son Nick Newman is slowly slipping into a situation that worries everyone around him.
The biggest concern this week is Nick's condition. Something about his behavior is off.
He is not acting like himself, and those closest to him can feel it. There is a growing sense that Nick is dealing with something deeper than he is willing to admit. His emotional stability is starting to crack, and that becomes a major focus for everyone involved. Victor notices it first. As always, he doesn't waste time. When Victor sees a problem, he moves fast, and he moves hard. He begins questioning Nick's judgment, pushing him to explain himself, and trying to figure out what exactly is going on behind his increasingly unpredictable actions. But Nick is not in a place where he wants to be controlled. He is already struggling internally, and the pressure from his father only makes things worse. Instead of slowing down, Nick becomes more stubborn, more determined, and more emotionally reactive. The situation between father and son begins to tighten like a coil ready to snap. Meanwhile, Nikki is watching all of this unfold with growing concern. Unlike Victor, she is not focused on control or strategy. She is focused on her son. She can see that Nick is fighting something invisible, something he is not openly sharing. And that silent struggle is beginning to affect the entire family dynamic. At the same time, outside forces are adding even more pressure to the Newman world. There is still lingering chaos connected to Matt Clark, a figure whose presence continues to create tension and fear. Even though not everything is fully revealed yet, the emotional impact of his return is already being felt. Nick, in particular, is deeply affected. His emotional state becomes more unstable whenever Matt Clark is mentioned. It's clear that there is unresolved history there, something that is triggering reactions Nick cannot fully control. And this is exactly what worries Victor and Nikki the most. While the Newman family deals with internal crisis, other storylines begin to quietly move forward in the background. Sally and Billy's relationship starts to feel pressure from the past. Sally is becoming increasingly aware that Billy's history might not stay buried forever. There is a growing fear that old mistakes could resurface and damage their present stability. Sally is not directly involved in the Newman crisis, but she can sense that the entire city is shifting into something unpredictable. Elsewhere, Chelsea and Adam begin to strategize. They are working together again, but not in a romantic sense, more in a calculated, business-driven way. They are preparing for a rival situation that could impact their position. Both of them are experienced in manipulation, planning, and survival in Genoa City, and this week they are quietly building their next move. But even as business tensions rise, emotional conflicts are taking center stage elsewhere. Sharon finds herself stepping into unexpected conversations with Phyllis. These interactions are not friendly, but they are also not completely hostile.
There is a strange mix of judgment, advice, and tension.
Sharon, in her own way, gives Phyllis unsolicited advice, something Phyllis is not exactly known to accept easily. At the same time, Daniel attempts something difficult. He tries to bring peace between Phyllis and Christine.
The tension between them is long-standing, deeply rooted, and not easy to fix. Daniel's effort is less about immediate resolution and more about preventing things from escalating further. But in Genoa City, even good intentions often lead to complicated outcomes. And in the background of all these shifting relationships, one more surprising thread is developing quietly. Patty is still present in Genoa City, and her influence is becoming more noticeable again. She is involved in helping Matt Clark navigate the city, which immediately raises questions about her true intentions. Patty has never been a simple character.
Her motivations are unpredictable, and her actions often blur the line between helpful and dangerous.
This connection between Patty and Matt Clark creates an unsettling feeling.
It suggests that Matt is not just returning as a memory from the past, he is actively rebuilding connections, influence, and possibly power. As all of this builds, Victor begins to take stronger control over the situation surrounding Nick. His instincts tell him that waiting is not an option.
Something has to be done, and soon. But the problem is that Nick is not listening. And that makes everything more dangerous. The emotional gap between father and son grows wider. Victor believes he is protecting Nick. Nick believes he is being controlled.
Nikki stands somewhere in the middle, trying to hold both sides together before everything completely breaks apart.
And that is where the week begins. A family already under pressure, facing emotional instability, external threats, and hidden agendas. Nothing is stable. Nothing is simple.
And as Genoa City always proves, when things start to spiral, they rarely slow down on their own.
As the week of May 18th to 22nd continues in Genoa City, the tension inside the Newman family starts to sharpen in a very visible way.
What once looked like concern is now turning into confrontation, and what once felt like emotional worry is slowly becoming a battle of control versus independence.
At the center of it all is Nick Newman. Nick is still struggling, even if he refuses to fully admit it.
On the surface, he tries to act composed, like he has everything under control. But beneath that surface, there is a growing instability that people close to him can clearly sense. His decisions are becoming more impulsive, his emotions more unpredictable, and his reactions more intense whenever certain topics are brought up. Victor Newman is not the type of father to ignore that kind of behavior.
This week, Victor takes a much more direct approach.
Instead of observing from a distance, he actively questions Nick's judgment. Every decision Nick makes becomes a point of concern.
Every hesitation becomes a red flag. Victor is convinced that Nick is not thinking clearly, and in Victor's world, that means intervention is necessary. But Nick does not respond well to pressure.
Instead of backing down, he pushes forward even harder. There is a growing sense that Nick wants to handle things on his own terms, no matter how risky it becomes. That stubborn independence creates a dangerous friction between father and son. Neither is willing to fully step back, and neither is willing to completely give in. This leads to a series of emotionally charged exchanges where words carry more weight than actions.
Victor questions Nick's choices. Nick pushes back against Victor's authority. And in between them, there is a long history of love, disappointment, and unresolved expectations that makes every conversation more intense than the last. Nikki Newman watches this dynamic very closely. Unlike Victor, Nikki is not focused on control or correction. She is focused on understanding.
She can see that Nick is not just being reckless for no reason. Something is affecting him deeply, something emotional and unresolved. And instead of trying to force him into obedience, she tries to reach him emotionally.
But even Nikki finds it difficult to break through. Nick is closed off in a way that feels different this time. It is not just frustration, it feels like internal conflict. Like he is carrying something heavy that he refuses to share with anyone. And that silence is becoming more dangerous than any argument. Meanwhile, Victoria Newman begins to step into the situation. Victoria's approach is different from both Victor and Nikki.
She is practical, direct, and focused on outcomes.
She notices that Nick's recovery and emotional stability are not where they need to be. So instead of emotional discussions, she chooses confrontation.
Victoria confronts Nick about his recovery, questioning whether he is truly okay or just pretending to be.
Her concern is not soft, it is sharp and honest. She wants answers, not avoidance. And this puts Nick in an uncomfortable position, because Victoria is not easily dismissed.
For Nick, this feels like another layer of pressure stacking on top of everything else.
First Victor questions him. Then Nikki worries about him. Now Victoria is confronting him directly.
It begins to feel like everyone is watching him, analyzing him, and doubting him at the same time. And that is exactly what pushes him further into emotional isolation. Outside the Newman family, the shadow of Matt Clark continues to grow. Even when he is not physically present in every scene, his influence is everywhere.
The psychological impact of his return is still affecting multiple characters, especially Nick.
There is a sense that Matt Clark represents something unresolved from the past, something that is not fully understood but deeply felt.
Patty enters this storyline in a very important way. Patty is now actively helping Matt Clark navigate Genoa City.
This development immediately raises suspicion. Patty has always been unpredictable, but her involvement with someone like Matt adds a new layer of uncertainty.
It is unclear whether she is helping him out of loyalty, manipulation, or personal agenda.
What is clear is that Patty is not just a passive character in this situation.
She is involved.
And involvement in Genoa City usually means influence, secrets, and consequences waiting to unfold. As Patty guides Matt through the city, it becomes evident that Matt is not just trying to survive, he is trying to re-establish himself.
His return is not random.
It feels structured, intentional, and carefully managed. And Patty's role in that process makes everything more complicated.
Back on the Newman side, Victor continues to tighten his focus on Nick. He is no longer just observing, he is preparing to act if necessary. Victor believes that if Nick cannot stabilize himself, then stronger measures will be required.
But this approach only deepens the emotional gap between them.
Nick feels misunderstood. Victor feels justified.
And Nikki feels trapped in the middle, trying to prevent a full emotional breakdown within her family. At the same time, subtle shifts begin happening in other parts of Genoa City.
Daniel attempts to mediate ongoing tension involving Phyllis, hoping to prevent old conflicts from escalating further.
Sharon's earlier advice to Phyllis still lingers in the background, adding another layer of emotional complexity.
Nothing is fully resolved, but everything is quietly moving toward confrontation.
Elsewhere, Adam and Chelsea continue building their strategy against a rival. Their partnership is practical, but it carries an undercurrent of old familiarity. They operate like two people who understand each other's thinking, even when they are not aligned emotionally. Their planning remains quiet, but clearly intentional. And Sally, watching everything from a distance, begins to feel the pressure of Billy's past creeping closer.
There is an awareness that history in Genoa City never stays buried forever, and when it returns, it rarely arrives quietly.
But the emotional center of this week remains the Newman family.
Nick's instability, Victor's control, Nikki's concern, and Victoria's confrontation all begin to converge into one central conflict. Each character believes they are doing the right thing. But each action is also pushing the situation closer to a breaking point.
And as Patty moves deeper into Matt Clark's orbit, and Matt's presence continues to echo across the city, it becomes clear that this week is not about resolution.
It is about escalation. As Genoa City moves deeper into the week of May 18th to 22nd, the pressure inside the Newman family reaches a level that can no longer be ignored.
What started as concern has now turned into urgency. And what once felt like emotional disagreement is now becoming a full family crisis centered around Nick Newman.
Nick is slipping further into a dangerous emotional space.
Every attempt to help him seems to either fail or push him further away.
Victor's pressure, Nikki's concern, and Victoria's confrontation have all combined into one overwhelming force.
Instead of stabilizing Nick, it is becoming clear that the constant questioning and emotional intensity is affecting him in a deeper way than anyone expected.
Nick begins to show signs of complete emotional exhaustion.
His patience is thin, his thinking is scattered, and his decisions feel increasingly unpredictable.
It is not just rebellion anymore, it feels like internal collapse under pressure. Victor Newman notices this shift very clearly. For Victor, this is the moment where concern turns into action.
He can no longer treat this as a normal family disagreement. In his mind, Nick is heading toward something dangerous, and if no one steps in properly, the consequences could be severe.
But what makes this situation even more complicated is Nikki. Nikki is no longer willing to stay on the sidelines.
She sees what Victor sees, but she also sees something else, Nick's emotional pain. And that creates a divide between how she wants to handle the situation and how Victor insists it should be handled. For the first time in a while, Victor and Nikki are forced to set aside their differences. Not because everything between them is resolved, but because Nick's condition demands unity. The emotional weight of their son's crisis becomes stronger than their disagreements. And in a rare moment of alignment, they decide to focus entirely on Nick together.
This forced unity is not easy.
Victor still believes in control, structure, and tough decisions.
Nikki believes in emotional connection and understanding.
But for now, both agree on one thing: Nick cannot continue down this path alone.
Meanwhile, Nick himself is approaching a breaking point.
He begins to feel cornered from all sides.
Every conversation feels like pressure. Every concern feels like judgment.
And every attempt to help feels like control.
That perception pushes him further inward, making him more isolated than ever before.
There is a growing sense that Nick may do something impulsive if the pressure continues. And that fear spreads across the Newman family. Victoria becomes increasingly worried. She has already confronted Nick about his recovery, but now she starts to question whether confrontation is helping at all. Instead of progress, she sees resistance.
Instead of clarity, she sees confusion. Still, no one is willing to step back. Because in Genoa City, stepping back often means losing control of the situation completely. Outside the Newman crisis, other emotional storylines begin to intensify. Lily and Kane find themselves pulled into a complicated emotional space.
Kane opens up more about the personal toll of recent losses and struggles, revealing a more vulnerable side of himself. Lily, who has always maintained emotional boundaries, begins to lower them slightly as she sees Kane's sincerity and pain. Their connection is not fully restored, but it is no longer purely distant either.
There is hesitation, reflection, and emotional uncertainty. And that makes their dynamic more unpredictable moving forward.
At the same time, Malcolm's medical crisis continues to cast a shadow over their emotional decisions, forcing them to confront feelings they thought were long buried. Elsewhere, Jack begins to shift his perspective on Patty. For a long time, Jack has viewed Patty through a lens of caution and mistrust.
But this week, something changes. Patty's actions and words begin to influence his thinking in unexpected ways.
Instead of immediately rejecting her presence, Jack starts reconsidering her role in ongoing situations. This shift is subtle, but important.
Because in Genoa City, a change of heart rarely stays simple. It often leads to bigger consequences.
Meanwhile, Patty's involvement with Matt Clark continues to raise concerns. Her guidance of Matt through Genoa City suggests she is not just an observer, she is actively shaping his path.
Whether this is strategic, emotional, or manipulative remains unclear. But what is clear is that Matt is not operating alone in terms of influence. And that makes him even more dangerous. Matt Clark's presence continues to ripple across multiple storylines, even when he is not physically dominating every scene. His return is affecting decisions, relationships, and emotional stability across the board. And the longer he stays in the picture, the more unstable the environment becomes. Back with the Newmans, Victor and Nikki's temporary unity becomes the emotional anchor of the week. They are not fully aligned in ideology, but they are aligned in purpose. Protecting Nick becomes the priority. And even though their methods differ, their focus is the same. But unity under pressure is fragile. Because Nick's condition is still unresolved. The emotional damage is still building. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to predict what he might do next. And that uncertainty is what keeps everyone on edge. As the week moves forward, it becomes clear that this is not just a family concern anymore. It is a full-scale emotional crisis. And it is far from over. As the week of May 18th to 22nd continues in Genoa City, the emotional pressure that has been building inside the Newman family begins to spill into other corners of the city. What was once a private family concern is now influencing decisions, relationships, and long-standing rivalries. At the center of everything remains Nick Newman. Nick is no longer just struggling emotionally, he is now visibly on the edge of control. His behavior becomes increasingly unpredictable, and those closest to him can no longer ignore the seriousness of the situation. What makes it more dangerous is that Nick is still convinced he can handle everything on his own. That belief is what worries Victor the most. Victor Newman begins shifting from concern to strategy. He is no longer just trying to talk to Nick, he is preparing for stronger action if necessary.
In Victor's mind, when emotional reasoning fails, structure must take over. And this week, that mindset becomes more visible in how he approaches every conversation involving Nick.
Nick, however, interprets this differently.
To him, Victor's growing control feels like pressure tightening around his life.
Every warning feels like an order. Every concern feels like interference.
And every attempt to guide him feels like a lack of trust. This emotional disconnect pushes Nick further away from his family, even as they try harder to bring him back.
Nikki continues to struggle in the middle of this tension.
She can see both sides clearly, Victor's fear and Nick's pain.
But what she cannot do is bridge the gap between them.
Instead, she becomes the emotional anchor trying to hold the situation together, even as it continues to fall apart around her.
Victoria also remains involved, but her approach starts to evolve.
Her earlier confrontation with Nick has not produced the results she expected.
Instead of clarity, it created distance.
Now she begins to question whether a softer approach might be necessary, even though she is not fully convinced that Nick is stable enough to be left alone.
Meanwhile, across Genoa City, other storylines begin to move in more complex directions. Patty's connection with Matt Clark becomes more layered and concerning.
Rather than simply assisting him, Patty appears increasingly involved in shaping how Matt is navigating the city.
Their dynamic suggests more than coincidence, it feels intentional, strategic, and potentially dangerous.
Matt is not just relying on himself, he is relying on Patty's guidance, whether for information, access, or influence.
And that makes their partnership unpredictable.
Matt Clark continues to operate in the background with a calm but calculated presence. Even when he is not directly involved in every conversation, his influence continues to affect decisions around him. People are reacting to him, planning around him, and adjusting their behavior because of his return. Elsewhere, Jack Abbott begins to make a significant emotional shift. For a long time, Jack has maintained a defensive stance when it comes to Patty. But this week, that stance begins to weaken. Instead of immediately dismissing her, he starts reconsidering her intentions and potential role in ongoing conflicts. This is not full trust, but it is no longer full rejection either. That shift becomes important because Jack's decisions rarely stay personal. They often affect larger power dynamics in Genoa City, especially when Victor Newman is involved. And Victor is already operating at a heightened level of control this week. As Nick's situation worsens, Victor becomes more decisive. He is no longer waiting for improvement, he is preparing to intervene more directly if the situation does not stabilize soon.
This creates an atmosphere of urgency around every Newman family interaction. Nick, however, is moving in the opposite direction.
The more pressure he feels, the more unpredictable his choices become. Instead of slowing down, he begins taking risks emotionally and mentally. There is a growing sense that he is trying to regain control of his life in ways that may not be safe or sustainable. At the same time, Sally becomes increasingly aware of Billy's unresolved past. She senses that certain parts of his history may resurface at the worst possible time. That awareness begins to create tension in their relationship, even if nothing has fully exploded yet. In Genoa City, anticipation often becomes just as dangerous as the event itself. Meanwhile, Adam and Chelsea continue building their quiet strategy against a rival.
Their partnership remains functional and focused, but there is an underlying familiarity between them that never fully disappears. Even when they are working strictly on business, their connection still influences how they think and respond to each other. But the emotional spotlight remains on the Newman crisis. Victor and Nikki continue their forced unity, but it is becoming increasingly fragile. They are aligned in purpose, but not in method. And as Nick's condition becomes more unstable, even that alignment begins to feel strained. And then, outside the city's main conflict, another storyline begins to take shape. Holden and Claire prepare for their trip, which takes them toward New York. What starts as a simple journey quickly begins to feel like something more complicated. Emotional tension, unresolved feelings, and unexpected developments begin to surface between them, suggesting that this trip will not be as straightforward as it seems. Their dynamic shifts into unfamiliar territory, where past emotions and present uncertainty begin to collide. As the week progresses, it becomes clear that every storyline is tightening toward a central point.
Nick's instability, Matt Clark's influence, Patty's involvement, Jack's shifting mindset, and Victor's increasing control are all moving in parallel. None of these situations are isolated anymore, they are beginning to overlap in subtle but meaningful ways. And with each passing day, the sense of unpredictability grows stronger.
Because in Genoa City, when too many people start making decisions under pressure, something eventually breaks.
By the final stretch of the week in Genoa City, everything feels like it is moving toward a breaking point. The tension that has been building for days is no longer contained in separate storylines, it is converging into one unstable emotional storm. And at the center of it all is Nick Newman. Nick is no longer just struggling quietly. His emotional state has reached a level where even small triggers can set off major reactions. The pressure from his family, the unresolved trauma connected to Matt Clark, and his own refusal to slow down have all combined into a dangerous mix. Victor Newman realizes there is no more room for delay.
This is the moment where Victor and Nikki fully step in together. For the first time in a long while, they are not divided by strategy or emotion. They are united by urgency.
Nick's condition has forced them into the same direction, even if they still disagree on how to handle it.
Victor's approach is firm and controlling. Nikki's approach is emotional and grounding.
But together, they attempt one final push to reach Nick before things spiral beyond repair. Nick, however, is not receptive in the way they hope. Instead of calming down, he becomes more defensive. He feels cornered from every direction, his father's authority, his mother's concern, and his sister's questioning. In his mind, no one is truly listening to him. And that feeling pushes him toward a critical emotional confrontation. This becomes the turning point of the week. Nick reaches a moment where everything comes to the surface: frustration, fear, confusion, and long-buried emotional pain. It is not just an argument, it is an emotional release that exposes how deeply he has been struggling underneath everything else. Victor tries to maintain control during the confrontation, but even he can see that force alone is not enough this time. Nikki attempts to break through emotionally, trying to remind Nick that he is not alone.
But Nick is still caught between resistance and collapse, unsure which direction to move in. And in that unstable moment, nothing feels guaranteed. Elsewhere in Genoa City, Jack Abbott makes a decision that begins to carry consequences.
His shifting attitude toward Patty finally leads him to act in a way that is not fully calculated. What seemed like reconsideration turns into an emotional decision that could backfire later. Jack believes he is doing the right thing in the moment, but in Genoa City, good intentions often come with unexpected costs. That decision immediately begins to ripple outward, affecting how others perceive him and potentially creating future complications tied to both Patty and Victor's ongoing conflicts. Speaking of Patty, her influence continues to grow in the background of Matt Clark's return. Her involvement is no longer passive guidance, it feels like active shaping of events. Matt Clark, meanwhile, continues to operate with quiet confidence, as if he is always several steps ahead of everyone else. His presence remains unsettling, not because of constant action, but because of how deeply he is embedded in the emotional tension of the city.
Nothing about his return feels temporary. It feels strategic.
Meanwhile, Holden and Claire's trip takes a sharp and unexpected turn. What begins as a seemingly emotional journey quickly shifts into something more complicated.
Unspoken truths and unresolved feelings begin to surface between them, changing the tone of their dynamic.
The trip is no longer just about movement, it becomes about emotional discovery, and not all discoveries are comfortable. Their situation ends on an uncertain note, suggesting that whatever is developing between them is far from resolved.
Back in Genoa City, Sally continues to worry about Billy's past catching up with him.
That concern quietly grows stronger as the week progresses, hinting that unresolved history may soon re-enter their lives in a way that cannot be ignored.
Adam and Chelsea's strategic planning also reaches a more focused stage.
Their alliance becomes sharper, more intentional, and more structured. Even though emotions are not the focus, the underlying familiarity between them remains present, influencing subtle decisions and reactions. But the emotional core of everything remains the Newman family. Victor and Nikki's united front is strong, but not unbreakable.
Nick's situation is still unstable, and the outcome of their intervention is not fully clear.
What is clear is that they have reached a point where ignoring the problem is no longer possible.
Nick stands at a crossroads, between collapse and control, between isolation and acceptance, between running from his pain and finally confronting it.
And that uncertainty is where the week leaves him.
Not resolved. Not fully healed. But changed.
And in Genoa City, change is never the end of the story.
It is only the beginning of the next crisis.